Hi, everyone. This is Henne, Artistic Director of Theater Dybbuk, and thanks to those of you who are joining me for our 1 p.m. Pacific Friday chat that happens a few times a month. And I'm going to just patter here for a minute as people sometimes join us a minute or two in. So once again, this is Henne, Artistic Director of Theater Dybbuk, and I'm really thrilled to be here today with a friend and colleague, the president and CEO of the Philosophical Research Society in Los Angeles, Greg Salyer. Greg, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Aaron. This is a treat.
So glad you're here. And I will just say for those joining us that just to frame this conversation a little bit, that, you know, I've been doing these talks and chats with colleagues, collaborators, partners who have some unique perspectives on the world and who work with organizations that do as well and do amazing work for our communities. And I've been fortunate enough, and Theater Dybbuk has been fortunate enough to collaborate with the Philosophical Research Society. In 2019, we presented our work, Hell Prepared, at the Philosophical Research Society and had an amazing experience with you and your team, as well as the patrons and constituents who came from the community. And we're obviously in collaboration on other projects, and you know, some of you have watched this and heard me talk about our upcoming show Breaking Protocols, which due to the pandemic we're still waiting to see the exact date that will culminate, but we are due to present that with the Philosophical Research Society once again. So we're really looking forward to future collaborations and to the collaborations we've had in the past, so thank you. We've also had a great experience. I've had the pleasure of lecturing at the Research Society, which was really a joy, and of attending some lectures and learned a lot. So I think before we go into any more detail about those matters, I want to first start, as I often do, with asking a little bit about you. And so rather than me giving your whole bio, which is very impressive, I think it's better to say, tell us a little, you know, about yourself, frame a little of your work for us and where you come from.
Sure, happy to, Aaron, and thank you again for having me. I was just thinking as you were talking about protocols, that would have been this month, right, originally?
Yeah, it would have.
Yeah, so a little wistful about that, but we'll do it.
Yeah.
Next year or the year after or whenever.
Absolutely.
I really want to do it. So I grew up in East Tennessee in the mountains. There's a line in Homer about some place, I forget where it is, about it being a good place to raise a boy. And that was certainly true in the East Tennessee Appalachian Mountains. So I climbed all over those mountains, hiked, swam, canoed, all that. It was a great childhood. I'm very fortunate to be from there and to be able to take advantage of the landscapes there. There's a cultural element, though. I grew up across the street from the Southern Baptist Church in a very small community. And the community was my whole world, and the church was the center of that community. So it was this amazing, almost seamless blend of culture and religion that I think still affects me today. And so I, well-versed in the Bible because we thought it was the inerrant word of God. That's the word we used, inerrant, without error. And so, not surprisingly, I ended up studying the Bible in college. In fact, I started at a regional university and I was going to do business. And I'm like, yeah. I'm going to do something easy like philosophy. So I transferred to a small liberal arts college that had a great philosophy and religion curriculum. And then I was considering being a minister, and a wise man was visiting our campus from Western Kentucky University, and he's like, I don't think you want to do that. I think that guy every day in my mind because he was quiet. He's like, come to my school where I offer a Master of Arts degree. You can do it in a year. It's not designed for ministers. It's designed for scholars. And if after a year you still want to go to seminary, go ahead. I think he probably knew something because sure enough, I went there. I'd taken Greek in college, and now I'm working with some pretty well-known scholars of the Bible, and I'm going, uh-oh, this isn't what I was told it was. And, you know, I was reading the original text in Greek as best we can get to the original text, and there are just problems. There are problems if you approach it as an inerrant text. There are no inerrant texts, of course. And so you kind of set people up to fail with that. And I failed with it. So my nascent faith was shattered by seeing what I saw. And not to get into too much detail, but I said, education has hurt me, so I'm not going to do education anymore. It really wrecked me because that was my worldview. So I decided to get a job selling hardware at a Home Depot-like place in Tennessee. Yeah, you know, forget about education. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to sell saw blades and hammers and hang out with the guys in the parking lot. And so I started doing that, and then I realized these guys were idiots. They were racist, sexist. I mean, you know, they were being themselves, but that was not where I needed to be. So my last term there in my master's program, there was a professor doing literary criticism of the Bible. And I remember asking him, it was my last course. I said, what are you doing? He's like, well, we're going to treat the book of Revelation like a literary text. And I'm like, I just couldn't process that. It was true. It was historical. It was logical. And what, literature? He's like, yeah, just, you know, give it a try. And of course, the text came alive then because I wasn't, you know, laying on these templates. I was letting it speak as a text. And so I went to Emory University to get my PhD, which I got in literature and religion. So literature really changed my life. And my first job was at a small college in Montgomery, Alabama, where I was hired in the philosophy department. But when I left 10 years later, I was chair of the English department. So that's a kind of anecdote of my career.
Wow.
So I've taught all over. I was at Boston University for a while. And then I retired early, did some traveling, and came to Los Angeles and thought, well, I guess I could keep teaching now that I've got this traveling out of my system, and I did some writing. So I started doing online teaching. And that was as an adjunct. So you get a course here, a course there. Really interesting. I put together a whole second career out of online teaching that was more profitable than years in administration and teaching. And then, you know, I would look for classes on campuses in Los Angeles. So I would search for that too, but I never found anything. And then one day in April 2016, I did a search differently. I don't know what I did, but the Philosophical Research Society came up as the first hit.
Wow.
And I remember just staring at it again, like, what is this place? And why haven't I heard of it? Which is a refrain I hear now almost every day.
Absolutely.
Right. And so in April 2016, I wrote my predecessor, the President Obadiah Harris, and said, I don't know how I missed you, but I'd love to help with anything I can. And I remember it was a Tuesday. He said, come in on Thursday. I came in, I talked to him for 5 minutes. He said, can you start on Monday with a world religions class? So I've been here ever since. He resigned the next year, and I was kind of here, and the board said, would you like to be president? And I said, I would more than like to be president. I feel called to be president. And here I am.
Wow. I love, what I love about this story is, I have to say, I mean, this is exactly the experience. A part of what you said is exactly the experience I and many of my colleagues have had, where I remember when a few years ago I came to PRS, and I live, you know, half a mile away, had passed it many, many times. but had never walked in. And suddenly it all made sense to me, and it was a lovely place with welcoming people, a center for learning, but I had never experienced it. And I'm going to ask you a little details about it in a moment, but I will share for those who haven't been there. It's up on a little hill in the Los Feliz part of Los Angeles, and it's a wonderful kind of small campus that contains books of wisdom, has an extensive library, which I'm sure you'll share about with us a little bit, and also has lectures and other learning opportunities. So, and it's been there for a very long time, especially by Los Angeles standards in terms of how long things have been in the same place. So it's really remarkable. And so many of us, I now call myself an Angelino, even though I'm not originally from here. It's amazing that so many of us have never experienced it in person. So and then of course we partnered with you, right? This is a familiar refrain. So, along those lines, I would love to hear from you a little bit about the Philosophical Research Society, its history, how it works, its trajectory, all of that.
Sure. Let me ask you something first. How long have you been in Los Angeles?
I've been in Los Angeles since 1996.
Oh, you're definitely an Angelino.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah. My family from New Jersey watching. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Okay. I had this conversation with my wife recently because we've been here now 8 years. And I said, I think we're Angelinos, right? And she's like, I don't know. But I said, listen, we're Angelinos. We're just saying it.
Totally.
I think 8 years counts.
Oh yeah. So 20, like 24, it's I am definitely at home. And I love this city. This city's like an onion. It unpeels. It unpeels over time. It's hard to understand immediately, but if you take time with it, it keeps presenting itself in new ways.
Absolutely. And I'm going to come back to your question, but I think this is really important.
Yeah.
We've done, for the last 2 years, we've done a series in the fall called Los Angeles Stories, where we try to interpret this city, which is impossible, but it's fun. And I'm going to miss doing that because it's just such a wonderful city, west of the West, as Woodrow Wilson called it.
Absolutely.
Oh, no, Teddy Roosevelt, sorry. Anyway, so speaking of Los Angeles, our good friend Stephen Heller, who is bishop of the Gnostic Church on Beechwood at the Besant Lodge, he says that Los Angeles is the Alexandria of the contemporary world. So the Center for Learning, libraries, etc. And Los Angeles, I agree with him. Los Angeles is that. I would go even further to say that Silver Lake, Los Feliz, even parts of Glendale and Hollywood have this collection of places that are devoted to mysticism, exploration, intellectual inquiry. I think is unique, and we're among those, but we're not the only one. So it was in 1934 that Manly Palmer Hall, our founder, purchased this land, which was wild mustard in 1934. It's hard to imagine there was nothing here. And it's the corner of Los Feliz Boulevard and Griffith Park Boulevard. So it's a major intersection. And he was born in Canada in 1901, worked on Wall Street a little while and saw the vacuousness of that and said, I want none of that. And eventually moved to Santa Monica with his grandmother, who was a Rosicrucian. Now, this is a 16th century mystical sect that gives birth kind of to other mystical sects like Theosophy. So he was steeped in that tradition, and it was all happening in the early 20th century in Los Angeles, in Oceanside. Crotona is part of that. The Hollywood Bowl is a result of Theosophy. And so he's in the thick of all that. And he comes here and starts lecturing at 21, which I still can't get my head around. He's drawing enormous crowds. And if you've watched Perry Mason, the new Perry Mason, they captured this so beautifully. It was the time of Amy Semple McPherson and other people, lots of people running around saying lots of things. using the new techniques of Hollywood, like Sister Amy did, to preach the gospel. The difference with Mr. Hall was that he had read everything, remembered everything, and could lecture on it in a compelling way. So I like to say he did his homework. Other people were doing really interesting things, but Mr. Hall knew this stuff cold. And by this stuff, I mean everything in the world that attempts to get at the meaning of life, from the Hindu Vedas to modern psychology, or psychology as it was then, to Buddhism, to Christianity, to the Kabbalah, everything. I suspect he had a photographic memory because he read everything and he could just pull it out. And when he lectured flawlessly for 90 minutes. See what I did? He never did that. It was flawless, no pauses, no ums. And just the world's wisdom, like right here at his fingertips, that he could pull out and apply to the topic. So he lectured at Carnegie Hall, he lectured in Japan and Europe. And then he got some patronage, and a couple of women in Santa Barbara who said, you know, go lecture around the world, pick up the books you need and the art and artifacts you need, and we'll help you form the Philosophical Research Society, which he did in 1934. And the design was to be a Mayan temple. And so the architect was Robert Stacy Judd, who some of your listeners will probably know was at the center of Mayan revival architecture. He did the Aztec Hotel in Monrovia. And you know, around that time, there was a lot of this Egyptian Mayan architecture taking hold in Los Angeles, and we're a part of that. I sometimes wonder what it would be like to be the president of a Mayan temple in Los Feliz. I think it would be awesome, but this is pretty awesome. So, right, it didn't become the massive Mayan temple they had planned, but it is Mayan revival architecture, and it is a historical cultural monument in Los Angeles. So what did Mr. Hall do? He started lecturing, and he had a printing operation here. So he wrote, 20 books. We have, 1,000 or more of his lectures. This was his forte. I mean, he was a great writer, but he was really in his element when he was speaking. And it was live. And I mean, I'm talking to a theater person. I don't need to explain this to you, the difference. And so people would transcribe the lectures, and that accounts for most of his work. So there's printing house. And then, of course, he did what we call the Big Book in 1928. He was 27 years old, and he wrote The Secret Teachings of All Ages. The actual title, an encyclopedic outline of Kabbalistic, Rosicrucian, Hermetic, and Symbolic philosophy, I think. And then there's another subtitle under that. And that remains our bestseller. It still flies off the shelves, published in 1928 with paintings by J. Augustus Knapp, the great esoteric painter with whom Mr. Hall collaborated. Mr. Hall died in 1990, 30 years ago tomorrow. So we actually have a lecture by his friend and colleague, Stephen Heller, on Mr. Hall's influence and applying what he taught to troubled times. So Mr. Hall died in 1990. My predecessor, Dr. Harris, came along about 1997. There was a troubled period for PRS there, as there always is, I might add, when a charismatic person leaves the institution he founded. We see this in world religions all the time. So Dr. Harris was brilliant. It was 2001, he decided to create the University of Philosophical Research, an online wisdom school. Now, keep in mind, 2001, no one's online. No, I did my first online course in 2000, and it was a disaster. Nobody knew what we were doing.
Sure.
But Obadiah Harris put this wisdom school together in 2001, offering a graduate degree in consciousness studies, eventually a graduate degree in depth psychology, and an undergraduate degree. Now, last year, we closed that university mainly because the accreditation environment is such that accreditors, if you can't draw a straight line from your degree to a job that graduates are getting, you can't get accredited. And so we would have these surreal conversations when the accreditors came. What do your graduates in consciousness studies do professionally? Well, they do all kinds of things. They're in the entertainment industry, they're in the ministry, they're CEOs of companies. Yeah, but how does that relate to consciousness studies? I'm like, well, it doesn't relate at all, or it relates in every single way. It's about self-awareness. So we just kind of saw the writing on the wall, and we said, it's hard. It's hard to maintain a university. In addition to the accreditor, there's state regulators and stuff. We're just too small, and it became too much of a burden. So we returned last year to PRS. We still do classes, they're just not accredited, and we're now back kind of to where Manly Hall was in 1934 with our mission, which has been unchanged since then, which is, to help seekers find the resources they need for their path. And as we put it now, practical and profound wisdom for the 21st century.
What I find so interesting about sort of the picture you painted is in this world of capitalism, right? That's often about something has value because it has measurable value.
Yes.
In the way in which we use it in the world, and even as we get to even more esoteric studies in large universities, it's still often attached to a career path as opposed to just for the sake of learning, right? And I really appreciated you framing the work of PRS as for people seeking wisdom, and wherever they are in their journey, and whatever their entry point. And I'm sure people come to you who are really informed in certain areas and want to continue to kind of fill that well. And then others come probably with less of a basin of knowledge in certain areas, and their eyes are being open to new ideas. And that's a really interesting combination to bring together.
It is, and you know how you can't see things until the change has been made, right? And so we after we withdrew from accreditation, we kind of saw that, well, we say we're here for seekers, and yet when they come to us, we say, okay, we need your transcript, we need a letter of recommendation, and we might not accept you. I'm like, there's just something wrong with that fundamentally. Yeah, if someone comes to you, you can't help them.
Yeah.
So we didn't even see that until we'd made the change. And so now, if you're seeking wisdom and you want to take a class with us, you just click, pay the tuition, and you're in. You don't have to prove your worth. You don't have to prove anything. Just come in and enjoy the collaboration of classroom, lecture, and discussion online.
I'm curious about hearing that, and especially in this moment where it is online. And I want to think outside this moment too of the sort of overall way PRS has been operating over the last few years. So one of the things I find so fascinating about PRS that we don't see in a lot of places is the unique mixture of things. That there is real intellectual engagement, right? Some of the discussions and lectures have a great deal of kind of intellectual, historical content. There is engagement with mysticism, spirituality, religion, both in a scholarly way and in a more spiritual, enlightening way. And then there's also different modalities for engaging with people. There's partnering with organizations like Theater Dybbuk that are artistic, and you have an art gallery, and you've done sort of cultural concerts and other things like that in your courtyard, while also doing lectures and book study and meditation. And so I'm curious about that approach. I'd love to hear a little bit about that unique combination, that really multifaceted engagement strategy that isn't maybe that common among organizations that have such an interest in scholarship and history as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a great question, a great prompt to talk about what we do. And again, I have to give credit to Mr. Hall because he was always involved in art. We have an amazing art collection that he curated himself. And if you do what we do, which is non-academic, I mean, it's intellectual, but it's not academic, meaning we don't have allegiances to a guild, like the study of philosophy. Mr. Hall actually disliked academic philosophy because it got too ethereal and abstract, and it should be practical. It's the love of wisdom, right? Not the love of theory, although I love theory. But if you can't do anything with it, he didn't think it was worth doing. So he was so good about recognizing worlds beyond texts. And I don't see many institutions that are text based as we are. We have a library, right? Willing to go beyond the text. And it's been my great honor to help PRS renew that commitment to what's beyond the words. And that's why I was so happy to collaborate with Theater Dybbuk. The original art form was theater, and it's so powerful because it's words and images, but especially the body. It engages the body instead of just the mind. And your plays wear out your actors. I mean, you really engage the body.
They get a workout.
They do. I'm impressed.
They get a workout. And, what's interesting just hearing you talk about this is also, I think one of the, I've had a few different experiences at PRS that I found so fascinating. And you referred to the library, and just to give the people watching this a little view. So there's an amazing library that has an incredible collection of books, some of which are quite old, from a variety of traditions and mystical traditions. And so people come and study in the library and the archive. And what I love, though, is that it is a living venue. That while it's an archive and it's a space for research, and people really do come and do research, and I know you have partnerships that you keep that research up to date with other organizations. But I also know that one of the first experiences I had was a concert taking place in the library. And I feel like philosophically, it says something about the fact that exactly what you're saying, that text only lives in conversation with life and with creation. And I really witness that in the way in which PRS engages.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you. Yeah, that's at the heart of my own belief is I would phrase it as dialogue. It's human interaction. You said it better than I can. And if you stay with the text, if you stay with words, you're just limiting yourself. You're not engaging in dialogue with other forms of knowing, other forms of beauty, other forms of wisdom. So yes, I'm really happy that we've really integrated the arts, especially during my administration. We created an art gallery. We had a storage building in the back that for, 30 years had just had crap in it. And now it's an amazing art gallery. David Orr was our artist in residence and did a show there called Illumined, an inaugural show that was David's photographs of our text. And this is a perfect anecdote. Photographs of our rare texts made into mandalas, digitally manipulated into mandalas. And I'm like, how perfect is that, to transcend the text, but to incorporate it at the same time. So important. Music, arts. We've got a presentation tomorrow, I think, by some people, some artists called Wellborn. Just so happy to have that as part of our mission now, because, I like philosophy, I like literature, but frankly, nothing quite moves me like a play or music or art, and to ignore that, it would just be tragic.
So I'm curious, before in these last 5-10 minutes, I'm curious about, along those lines, there's two other things I want to ask you. The first is along those lines of now I'm going to go to the personal for a second. You've really talked about, and I'm sure there are many places where the personal aligns with your philosophy around how you lead PRS. Yeah. But what you were just talking about with these intersections, and with, I'd love to hear a little bit about your general thoughts about the value of those intersections, and also what that may mean, to bring it back to PRS, for the future of PRS, where it may be headed with these intersections between mysticism, study, text, arts engagement, right? All of these together. So both in general, how that lands with you, and also what it may mean for what's coming.
Oh, wow. Amazing question. I'm going to need about 90 minutes.
I knew you could answer a sliver of it. It's okay.
It's a great question. Let me put it this way. Related to what I was saying before about the value of the arts and these intersections, philosophy, as it has been traditionally practiced in the guild in higher education, has been about the pursuit of truth. And Mr. Hall talked about truth a lot in his works, but I honestly don't think that's what he meant. And I think I can prove that. I think what he in particular and many others mean by truth is meaning. So if you're after truth, then you need a method, and it needs to be rigorous and unfailing. You must stick to your method. And so science, certain kinds of philosophy. And once you achieve your end with that method, then you have the truth, and there can be no other, right? Yeah. Because look, I've filled in my blanks, I followed my steps, this is the truth. And if you don't agree, then you don't have truth. And that's a trigger for all kinds of things. If you can make that move, you don't have the truth, therefore you don't deserve X, and you do deserve this punishment. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But if we understand the search for truth is really the search for meaning, then the more meaning, the better, right? Give me more meaning. Give me more ways to see things, because meaning is abundant. It overflows, and it's not limited to a method or a text or anything. It's not limited. And so that's the value of what I see in our mission right now, is Paul Ricoeur said, this was years ago, he said, we live with a hermeneutics of suspicion, meaning every interpretive move is a kind of cynical move, or at least a move of distrust. It doesn't have to be that way. There can be what he called a hermeneutics of trust. And that comes only in community. And I was talking with some PRS community members a few weeks ago, and we were talking about what's going forward, what's going to happen, and I'd given a lecture on Jacques Ellul, a French theorist of technology, and he said that the only way to counteract technology, this was like last year I gave the lecture, I think. He says the only way to counteract this juggernaut of technology, and we could include now, because it's all integrated, politics, is via small groups. And I remember saying that, quoting him, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. Now I know what it means, right? Because it's happening. small groups meeting and sharing in community and in ritual and in myth, I think are the way forward. I think we're going to need that. I think we're desperate for it because we can't do it on scale. I mean, we're trying with Twitter and social media and we're trying to like perform those functions for ourselves, those community functions. We're doing it right now and it goes so far, but at some point you got to get bodies in the same space, right? And if you can do that, and it can't be 100,000 bodies, right? It has to be small groups sharing in a hermeneutics of trust. And that I think a year ago that would have sounded aspirational and too idealistic, but I think now it sounds like survival.
I appreciate that. First of all, this distinction between meaning and truth, I think is a really important one, especially as we are in a world of thinking about what is fact versus is what is subjective experience, and how do we navigate the spaces between. And of course, the search for meaning means, as you described it, multifaceted. It's actually about all the ways people engage, and then thinking about these intimate engagements that require something else than large-scale engagements. They require a different kind of vulnerability. They require, I won't even say more or less, they just require other muscles to be worked than the muscles that are in large gatherings or in distance gatherings. And so I'm really hearing you express PRS's role of being about, as you said, dealing with trust and also with creating meaning, and doing it understanding that yes, there is a large scale vision of that in terms of online and all the people the organization is touching in those ways, but also there's a vision of it that has to do with post-pandemic, how we gather in small spaces in person and are breathing the same air, so that we can build a certain brand of trust, which I think is really fascinating.
And not to pander, but that's right in the wheelhouse of theater.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that some of the most meaningful theater often happens in, I forget who it was, famous theater artist who talks about great reckonings in small rooms, in tiny rooms, right? That this idea that in a way you can't separate those out, that actually being in a small space has meaning together. Yeah. So along those lines, I want to sort of think about in these last moments, the moment we're in, and you sort of started to allude to this, which is we're in the moment of obviously the global pandemic. We're in a moment of the ongoing fight for racial justice in our country. The shooting that just happened in Kenosha and the tragedy of that, the march on Washington that's happening today. There's so much going on in terms of how we're rethinking the ways, hopefully, we're rethinking the ways in which we live with one another because of the needs to evolve, and also because of the literal practical needs of the moment in order to stay safe. So I just love to hear a little bit about how PRS is grappling with all this, and what's on your mind as an organization and as yourself about what's the best ways to handle it and what you're experimenting with.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Great question again. When the George Floyd murder occurred, we were trying to reconfigure PRS to be online only, which is difficult because, as you mentioned, we're such a place, you walk through the gates and you feel different, and there's no way to replicate that online. And then George Floyd was murdered, and we just stopped, and we just said, let's take account of ourselves and what we're doing and what we didn't do and what we could do better. And we spent a month of staff meetings and other conversations just about, who are we? Esoterica in general is extremely white, extremely male. And we kind of looked back at what we'd done with you and with other partners, and we thought, you know, there's always more to do, but we're pretty proud of what we've done in terms of addressing issues of race, gender, bigotry in general. But we can shift focus and be more aware of how to support our partners of who are typically marginalized. And in fact, this Wellborn event this weekend comes right out of that. That was done a year ago, but they came to us, and it's about kind of eugenics, which, you know, you may have been studying up on for protocols. Yeah. And they say, we'd like to do it again virtually. And I'm like, yes, exactly right. And then we've just been really struggling with each other about who we are now in light of this. And our position has been through these dialogues with each other and with our community is that our mission remains the same. Is that I remember someone talking to someone a couple of years ago and saying, hey, you know, should I be talking about Trump in my lectures? And he's like, you are. Huh. Like, yes, that's it. Because if you can, because we're about helping you be a better, wiser person. And honestly, if we get right down to it, that's where the change happens. Right. There's a sense in which political discussion, cultural discussion, all that assumes that you're okay where you are. And now you're going against someone else who also feels okay where he is. Well, I mean, the outcome's pretty predictable, right?
Right.
But you can come together, like I was saying, if you can come together in a group, in a hermeneutics of trust, then you can say, I'm not okay. How are you? And the person can then respond. And now you're in this moment of learning and obtaining wisdom. I always say this, or I often say this. My favorite philosopher is an obscure Russian named Mikhail Bakhtin. And he has this agonizing essay on competition and knowing, but I think it's parable-like. He says, to know the world, I need the other. When you and I sit down and face each other, two different worlds are reflected in the pupils of our eyes. So he says, you cannot consummate, you cannot see the whole without the other. Just right now, there's wonderful books behind you that you can't see. We're not going to include MacBook Pros in this and all that. You see the metaphor. Yeah. To know you need the other. To know the world, you need the other. And that's where we are. We need the other, and we want to bring the other.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg. And I think on that note, that's a great way to bring us to a close. I will say, also just in this last minute or two, as we have been talking about PRS's work and the ways in which it's thinking about this moment and the way in which it's building trust and community. You've talked about it a little bit, but just to help people who are watching, if they want to find their way to PRS's work and to maybe what's going on in the immediate future, anything you want to share of where to check it out and how to get there?
Sure. First place, thank you for that, is prs.org, and you'll find everything you need there, including our YouTube channel, which is our voice in the world right now. And on our YouTube channel, you'll find a brilliant lecture by Henne on Lilith, and another brilliant lecture on theater. But the Lilith lecture was just profound. So look that up. We have a bookstore where you can buy Manly Hall's works, and we're shipping now. And we have classes that are affordable and fun, and you can participate as little or as much as you like, but the knowledge and the wisdom is there for you in these classes. For example, we've got a class right now running called Sacred Music of the Middle Ages, and then we've got a class coming up on beginner's mind, the Zen concept of, becoming more childlike.
That's great. Thank you, Greg. And always a pleasure to talk and good to see you even across these across these interwebs. And I really so appreciate the wisdom, the insight, the honesty, and the questions that you're asking and that PRS is asking. So thank you for taking the time today, and thanks to everyone else for watching. I'll be back in 2 weeks, actually with our collaborator and film artist and photographer, Tasso Papadakis, who will be on with me in 2 weeks. And if you've ever been on our website and seen our beautiful photos and some of the short films, those are made by Tasso. So it'll be great to speak with him. And Greg, thanks again, and do stay healthy and well.
You too. And we love Theodore Dybbuk and you and Flori and Julie and all of them.
Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.